think the Lord was really gentle with me until he wasn't. He was very, very firm. Um, where he brought me around to, I think, first to faith, and then to the result of faith, and then to how I can use that result to serve other people.
Mm.
And then he presented it all again and was like, I want you to do this. I basically laid it out to God, and I prayed all that night very earnestly, like, if this is what you have in mind for me, you have to make it work, because I have no idea what to do with this or where to take it or how to make it stronger or like what it is. And he did.
Welcome to the Light the Day podcast, where we explore spiritually transformative experiences. I'm your host, Julie Clough, and today I'm super excited to welcome to the show Elle Hales. Hi, Elle.
Hi, I'm super happy to be here.
It's going to be a lot of fun. Before we get started with you and your story, tell us just a little bit about yourself.
My name is Elle Hales. First of all, I'm a mom of four. I have a almost 2 month old at home, so I'm insanely busy. But my other job is spirit communication, and I have been doing that for between probably around 8 years now, so almost a decade. And I help people to connect with their loved ones through the veil and to find healing and sometimes a sense of closure, and to really affirm their belief that there is still life after death and that our loved ones haven't really lost us. My passion is spiritual gifts, and so I also mentor and teach others to develop their own spiritual gifts. Particularly, spirit communication is, my forte, but all spiritual gifts, intuition, and things I generally mentor with.
That's awesome. I love that. So take us back, share a little bit about, we want to hear your story. Like how it's not everybody that it's not like maybe I'm guessing, but I'm thinking when you're a kid, you probably weren't going like, I'm going to talk to dead people when I grow up.
Right.
That's going to be my job.
I don't know many children are quite that forward thinking, but definitely wasn't one of my long-term goals from anywhere ever in my life, really. I have had this gift for as long as I really can remember. I don't think I knew what it was. So from a very young age, I was very aware of things that I didn't realize other people weren't aware of. So I would have experiences or notice things, and I think I kind of thought everybody did. And so I didn't ever point them out. I didn't ever talk about them with my parents. A lot of the things that I would experience were scary. Um, I think I have a really poor memory, and I think I probably blocked a lot of it out as I got older because some of the things were just a little bit traumatic for me to witness. And I think as children are just more sensitive. And so I experienced some things that I found frightening, and so I would have trouble sleeping at night. I was labeled the scaredy cat of the family, and that progressed all the way through my childhood. Sometimes I would see shadows in my room at night. Sometimes I would see things on the wall. Sometimes I would know that there were people in the room with me, and it was very unnerving. Um, and whether they were good or evil at the point, I don't think it really mattered. I was just aware that there were people there that shouldn't be there in my room with me, and that
Mm.
was uncomfortable. So I don't know why, but I never really expressed that to my parents, and they just chalked it up as wild childhood imagination. I was watching too many scary movies on TV, or like reading things maybe I shouldn't be reading or something. I lived in Europe for quite some time. I was a military brat, and there's a lot of history there. There's a lot of energy there. There's a lot of spirits there. And there were some places that left their mark on me, just kind of as I experienced that latent history being there. And I kind of didn't talk about it with my parents. I felt like I didn't have a place to hang what I was experiencing. I grew up in a Christian home, And we kind of wavered through activity and inactivity as I was growing up. We moved a lot, so church sometimes
Hmm.
was really far away. Sometimes we didn't go, but nobody talked about these things. Nobody talked about spirits. Nobody talked about angels or demons, even really. And so I didn't have any context to hang my experiences on, and I didn't know what they were or where they were coming from. And so I mostly didn't talk about it. Didn't stop them from happening to me. I would just have my brothers sleep on my floor at night so that I
Oh,
could get to sleep.
interesting.
I had to leave all the lights on to go to bed. And I lived under this constant state of anxiety because I didn't know how to handle this. I didn't know what it was and what was happening to me. As I moved into my teenage years, I really struggled to find a context. I wanted an explanation. I wanted to know why I was having these experiences, what was happening. So I wandered. I was always very concerned with the state of the soul, with the spirit, with religion, with life and death. I always said I had a very interesting relationship with death. I was very, very aware of death from a very young age, when most children probably don't conceptualize what that is.
Hmm.
And so I wandered from everything from Wicca through Catholicism, like going
Wow.
through all these kind of different faith backgrounds, looking for explanations, how they all described, spiritual vision. And ultimately, I questioned the reality of God. I questioned our, eternal nature, everything, trying to find something that I could peg what was going on with me in. Um, Ultimately, as a late teenager, I think I was probably 16 or 17 at the time. Um, I was looking more into like spiritualism and probably more like Wicca and paganism because it seemed like it fit the track more than
Mm.
Christianity, where people thought this stuff was mostly negative, right?
Uh-huh.
So it wasn't the most positive period of my life, and I was a bit lost. Um, One particular night, I had an experience that really shook me. I was alone in my house. I don't know where my parents were. I think they're probably at my brother's away game or something. Um, and I was in my bedroom. It was pretty late at night, probably. All of the lights in my own room are off. I had the hallway lights on because I always slept with lights on, so I was
Hmm.
constantly anxious. Um, and as I was laying there in the dark, I had this overwhelming sense of something negative just come upon me. And that wasn't uncommon. Usually I would hide under the covers or go turn on more lights. In this particular sense, for some reason, like I felt kind of paralyzed, like I couldn't move. And I became aware that there was something presence in my room that was very dark. And it was like sci-fi channel, like shadows coalesced in the corner of my room and a figure appeared, and it was not a good being. It was something that was very, very dark, and it was like negative space, like
Mm.
seeing something in inverse that was just darkness, and I was terrified. I don't know how long I sat there in my bed, not being able to move, overcome with horror. And we just stared at each other. I couldn't see eyes on this shape, but I knew that it was looking at me to the core of me, and I knew that I was looking at it, and it was real. And that terrified me. I sat there for, it might have been 30 seconds, it might have been 5 minutes. And then a story came to my mind that my mother had told me. I don't know how we had this conversation. One day in the car on the way home from probably the grocery store, we were alone, and she told me that she had seen demons before. Okay, strange conversation. But how she handled that, she said she remembered her like Sunday school teacher when she was very young had told her, if you're ever in a situation where something like that happens, you call upon the name of Jesus Christ and you
Mm.
say it out loud. But I
Hmm.
was like, I've got nothing else. So I just said, Jesus Christ, please save me. And I said his name over and over and over again. I said it out loud. And as I said that, I felt this peace and this calm come into this room, and that evil spirit left. It just like dematerialized. It seriously like
Yeah.
computer graphics in my room in reality. And it was gone. And at that point, I realized there was a lot of power to that name, and that must mean something. And it sent me back on this path, back again towards Christianity, back towards the faith of my childhood, where I became incredibly motivated to find out if that was like real, what that was, and what that meant. And I had several really moving experiences after that, where I really came to understand the reality of God and the reality of my Savior. And um, it set me on a trajectory for my life, kind of that could lead me up to this point. I did a lot of things after that. I served a mission for my church in Taiwan. And after that experience, particularly, I shoved any spiritual gift away really hard. I was like, this is bad. I'm not going to go into this. All of this is scary.
Yeah, it's
Like,
like
I don't
you
want
take it
to
all and put it in one big box and go
throw it out.
over here. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it was a hard no, hard pass for me. And so I kind of went on with my life. I was a teenager, so I was concerned about graduating and then college. And I ended up doing a mission for my church, which never was even on my horizons before. And I had a couple experiences while I was in Taiwan where I would be aware of other spirit presences. And it kind of gave me an ability to handle that because I had already done it before.
Hmm.
So it was kind of like there was building that I can see now, looking back into the past. Hindsight is 2020. And looking back at my past, I can see how there were stepping stones that kind of brought me into kind of an awareness of this. Um, and there are also some good presences too, where I became aware of lights around people and people on the other side who wanted to help the people that I was working with and serving in Taiwan. I came home from that mission and I was in college. I met a boy. I was really concerned about, all of the life stuff, getting married. I was distracted, happily so. After we had been married for a number of years, my husband went to law school and I was alone a lot. Law school is a lonely time for whoever's not in law school. They call it the law school widow. And I
Hmm.
was, and we had two little tiny children at home, and all of this stuff started to resurface for some reason. He would spend long hours at school studying, and I would spend long hours kind of like staring out the window at myself, minding two small children. And somehow, in this really thoughtful, ponderous period, all of this stuff, all these experiences started coming back to me. And I felt a very strong pull back towards these gifts and thinking about all this stuff now from a very different perspective and analyzing it and what it was and what it meant and why I had those experiences as a child and a teenager. And it's always the strangest things that God uses as tools to move us along, right? I became aware of this. I had several very large hurdles. I didn't know if it was okay, for one, to like apply into my faith now that I was very dedicated to. I didn't know if it was acceptable, if it was from God, and I also didn't know if it was ever not going to be terrifying,
Hmm.
or even what to do with it. So I would ponder all of these questions a lot. It was like I could never escape it. It was always in the back of my mind. It was always lurking somewhere behind me as I went through my life. And I was in the scriptures a lot. I have a sister-in-law who was also kind of going through a healing journey at the time. She had had a lot of loss in her life. She has an autoimmune disease that can be quite devastating. And so she was going through energy work and a lot of self-healing at the time as we were both taking these parallel journeys into like spirituality and metaphysics. So we were kind of tackling this beast together, and she was a really important support to me as I was really wondering about the morality of my, like the state of my soul with this thing that seems so left field. There was one night in particular. I went home to my parents' house. My husband was, I think, studying for finals or something for one of his semesters. So I took my two boys home to my parents' ranch. My dad was in the Middle East. He's always in the Middle East. He was contracting at the time. And so it was just my mom. And she kind of likes to be in her room quite a lot. So I was very isolated there too, to a certain extent. This night I had watched this movie, and it was kind of a thinker type movie. It was posing a lot of questions about death and about it had death personified and kind of posed it in a light that was somewhat positive, like how it could affect people's lives and help them change and grow and kind of be for the better. And I really appreciated the way that they had artistically taken this concept and changed it. And I was thinking about that, and very, very strongly that night, I felt the spirit come to me, and it brought back all these experiences that I have, and I heard it tell me, I want you to do this.
Hmm.
This is a gift I've given you, and I have a plan, and I want you to do this. And I was terrified. I was like, what does that mean? It's like, I don't know I can do that. It was so scary in the past of all these dark things that I had witnessed or things that I couldn't explain, and I had always been aware of them, and I wasn't sure I could open that door. And I spent the whole night in prayer and in the scriptures and thinking about that. And God was very firm with me, and he's like, I need you to do this thing that I have set out for you to do. And so I
So,
was
so
like,
can I interrupt you for just a second and just ask a question? Because,
yes.
you know, it sounds like from your experiences as a child, and I can appreciate your story so much. I just there's so many times I want to go, oh yeah, me, no, oh yeah,
Yeah,
like raise my
it's not
hand.
uncommon.
Eh, And so I'm curious what kind of, because it's like you, a lot of these experiences felt really negative
Yeah.
as a child and even as a teenager, and you're trying to find some context for it. And now you're having this experience where it's like, okay, this is a gift. So was there a piece in there where you started to recognize, because I think there was, but I'm just
Mhm.
wondering where was the bridge between all of this is dark and maybe evil to, oh, there's light in
There's
this.
light here.
Yeah. I'm just curious about that
That's a
transition.
really good question. I think probably it was while I was in Taiwan, serving a mission for my church. I I had always been very sensitive to people, so very empathic. Like I walk into a room and I can pick up on the stuff that's going on, like even conversations that were had, people's emotional states. And that kind of was always a subtext to me noticing the spirits and things that had been in a room. And I think when I was in Taiwan, I could pair the two. Like I was saying, like I could see light around people or feel their intention, their good heart, or that there were heavenly helpers that were there in the wings waiting to come forward and help them. And I think that began to kind of shift my perception of it. And it was so subtle. It was so subtle that at first I didn't realize that I was noticing these things until I realized that my companions weren't noticing these things. The other
Okay.
missionaries I was working with weren't noticing these things. Um, and I began to see that there was a use for it in helping people too, because it would kind of key me in on the right things to say or the right questions to ask or the right answers to give. And in other people's stories, just enough information to help them feel loved and appreciated and know that there were people that loved and appreciated them. Right.
I love that.
So there was like a service aspect to it that I think that I was subconsciously starting to pick up. And then when I was dating my husband, I had kind of shared with him some of these things in my background. And he was like, yeah, I've noticed there's always something strange about you. Like you can tell things about me that I didn't tell you. Like the minute he would make a decision, I would know before he would say the decision. Or if he was coming over, I would text him and be like, when are you going to get here? And he's like, how did you know I was even going to come over? Or I was just very in tune with him. And it was very beneficial to our courtship and our dating. And so I could see that there were positive aspects of it, and it seemed to kind of have to do when it wasn't about me, when it was about somebody else,
Mhm.
which obviously is a theme. So um, it was a very slow build, I think, to get me to the point where I was comfortable even approaching it again.
Yeah.
And I think the Lord was really gentle with me until he wasn't. He was very, very firm. Um, where he brought me around to, I think, first to faith and then to the result of faith and then to how I can use that result to serve other people.
Mhm.
And then he presented it all again and was like, I want you to do this. So after that night, after I had had that experience in the spirit, where the Lord was very firm and basically I felt like there wasn't a choice in the matter. He was like, giving you time and now it's time. And so I basically laid it out to God and I prayed all that night very earnestly, like, if this is what you have in mind for me, you have to make it work because I have no idea what to do with this or where to take it or how to make it stronger or like what it is. And he did. So quite soon after that, my sister-in-law introduced me to somebody that she had met, who had done more like spirit team guiding sessions.
Mhm.
So I went to go see her, and she kind of, I felt, gave me permission to go. She connected with my like guiding angels and was like, "You have this gift. You're questioning whether you have it. You have it, and you need to go use it." And I was like, "Can I really?" And she's like, "Absolutely." And so after that point, I kind of jumped into it and I started to research. And I'm a little bit of an intellectual. So if I'm going to do something, I dive in 1,000% deep end. And the shallow is not my area. I'm like 10 feet. So I
I
jumped
can
in and I
appreciate that.
read, yeah, I read everything. I researched everything. I was interested in anybody who had anything to do with the spirit world, with energy work, with the metaphysical. And it began to kind of sift out people whose philosophies I agreed with and people whose philosophies I didn't agree with. I ended up finding someone who became my second mentor, but one who really stuck with me. And she had a class on spirit communication, on mediumship. And so I took that course and everything fell into place. And immediately I was having sessions with people, I was giving readings, and it brought everything that I had been experiencing, things I'd been seeing, things I'd been hearing, things I'd been feeling, and it brought it into focus, kind of like having not having glasses for your whole life and then putting on glasses. And so then you're
Mhm.
like, oh, this works. And after that point, I have spent the last 8 years developing that talent and that gift. And it's come to the point where it's a very comfortable modality for me, where I shift, in and out of that awareness. I still have, like I said, I'm a busy mom. I do a lot every day with my community, with my children, with my husband, with my church. But outside of those boundaries, I'm very aware of a spirit world that's actively functioning, and I'm really passionate about bringing that into focus for other people as well. I have um, given hundreds and hundreds of sessions to people, readings with people, and I have seen amazing things that um, really put it into perspective in a really interesting way. And somehow I still am the skeptical one all the time. I'm like, oh, that's just in my head. Like, that's just me. And then something amazing will come out of my mouth. And like, how did you know that? I'm like, they told me. Or I saw them or something. And it's been a beautiful journey to help people overcome grief and loss, and give them hope and faith and light. To the point in the past couple of years, people started asking me if I would teach them, and that opened up a whole bunch of doors. I started mentoring and helped other people who have similar gifts find their strength, find their footing, and that's been a really wonderful journey as well, helping many people to do this work and find comfort in this work and find acceptance in this work as well. And I'm passionate about building that community up and helping give context to this thing that um, is really around us all the time, that most of us don't notice. And I've seen beautiful things happen when people start talking about it. And so many people have experiences that they write off, they don't talk about. It's like, no, that actually was your sister-in-law that you lost 5 years ago who was talking to you. Like, I can see her behind you right now. And that, no, it was actually her talking to you right then that you wrote off as a silly thought or anxiety.
I'm so glad you're saying that because I feel like that's the reason these conversations are so important. That's the
Right?
reason that I felt the call to have these conversations on a podcast. And I know that you have felt that call too,
Yes.
is because these conversations, hearing other people's experiences, helps us to understand our own experiences.
Right.
And
It's so
sometimes
important.
when we keep it just within ourselves and we don't have context, like you were searching for some context for your experiences.
Yeah.
And I feel like things have changed so much, even in the last 10 years,
Yeah.
where
Everything has shifted.
everything has shifted in a big way, and people are becoming those who are willing to be open to it. And because there's always going to be those that aren't, and that's
Right.
okay. But those who are willing to be open to it can start to recognize that we are always like we basically live in the spirit world.
Right.
We live in a world surrounded by spirits, and then it's just choosing what kind of energy we're going to bring to that relationship. So
Exactly.
I wanted to ask you a couple questions about that because I also had some, dark experiences growing up. I also called on Jesus. I also, I had those experiences. And I'm wondering, and I don't worry about that anymore, but I know that
Right.
as I talk to other people and I'm telling them about angels and I'm telling them about, calling on their angels or speaking to those who have passed on, so many people say, well, how do you, how do you protect yourself? Like they're so
Hmm.
afraid of contacting the wrong realm that they hold themselves back. So I'm just curious what you would say to that or how you
Yeah.
have navigated that.
That's a really common question that people ask. Um,
Yep.
and that was my first hurdle. I was so second hurdle. First, I was wondering if it was okay to even practice this in the eyes of God. Um, the fear thing it took me several years to get over. And that's a whole really intriguing story too. We have a building that we kind of hold sacred. We do ordinances. It's our temple in my faith tradition, and we talk a lot of the deeper context in our faith and in scripture and things. And there's a particular line that talks about Satan and the power we have over Satan being embodied and being children of God. Um, and I had gone to the temple in this particular day, and I was really wrestling with this question about how we protect ourselves. And if I was going to walk right into all that scary stuff again, if I went into this like I was being asked to. And I was in the shower because all revelation comes in the shower. So think about alone time and the steam in the water. It's like a magical place. And as I was in there having these very serious thoughts, I again very clearly heard the voice of the Spirit tell me this line, which is that we have the power of choice. And it was like a door in the top of my head opened and information was dumped into my brain. It was the answer to all of life's questions, particularly this question of the answer is light and choice. And so with the metaphysics of how this kind of works spiritually, everything is vibration, right? Everything has a frequency. It's all words that we're just going to use to describe what this thing is: frequency, vibration, light. And we can know this even in physics. Molecules vibrate, atoms vibrate. Everything has a frequency. Things that are solid vibrate at a lower frequency, and things that are gaseous vibrate at a higher frequency. Molecules are further apart, they move faster. Things that are spirit are even faster. They have a higher frequency or a higher vibration, right? And it goes all the way up. When I have experienced angels in the past, they have a very purified, very refined matter to them. Kind of the difference maybe of really fine silk to cotton or canvas, which are what we are here. Um, and we sit somewhere on that scale. So things that are darker, things that are negative, we'll just say, they have a lower frequency. And we can even measure this with science. Things that have a negative emotion to them, like sadness or anger or depression, they bring us down in frequency. Whereas things that are positive have a higher vibration, like love and joy and light. So those spirits that sit in a negative place operate at a lower frequency than spirits that sit at a higher place do. And as we are moving through the world, if we are focused on those negative things, we're bringing about more negative things. We're sitting in that frequency and that vibration, and we're matching them. They are the closest to us because they're also at a low frequency spiritually, right? And so I think as a child, that's probably why most children hit that place first. Because if they're sensitive, then that's the low hanging fruit, right? It's right there. And so they can become aware of that. And the more you become aware of that, the more it can influence you because you see it, you know it's there. Like if you are studying the color blue, everything is blue is going to jump out at you, right?
Mhm.
But if we turn and align ourselves with a higher frequency, if we focus on those higher things, if we use that choice to choose to turn that gaze and align to the light, to something higher, it bumps us up to a higher frequency immediately. and we skip that whole section. So as long as you are choosing, you are intentional, you are doing the right things, and you are living your life at that higher frequency place, they literally can't touch you because you've moved yourself beyond where they are. And you
Yeah.
will have less influence. And you will, if you're reaching through that veil spiritually, you're not going to touch that. It's like
Yeah.
they can't stick to where you are because you're moving too fast, right? So the more light you gain in that, the further you get from them. To the point now, I was actually talking to a friend the other day, and I was like, I have a I have a side hobby of paranormal investigation. As somebody who is mediumistic, who has spirit communication as my gift, the beholding of angels and ministering spirits. I'm very aware of spirits on all the planes. But I have to, at this point, with within my development of my gifts, it's actually much harder for me to pick up on those negative things. It has to be intentional most of the time. I have to look for it. I have to look down for it because most of the time I'm operating in such a high place that it's above where they are. And that has become my modum operatus. That's where I am most of the time. And anybody can do that and anybody can get to that place just by choosing to focus on that light and move towards God instead of the other direction.
Yeah, I love that. So much to me is about the power of intention and
Yeah,
attention. So where are we putting our intention? If our intention is to reach for the light, they are going to
reach back.
respond to
Yeah.
that intention. We're raising our frequency with our feelings of gratitude. And in fact, one of the best ways I've found to connect to higher realms is through gratitude,
Yes.
and just that
It's like the
thankfulness.
gateway.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I love that so much. Um, I'm wondering if you could share, well, let me back up a little bit because I have a couple more questions. And one is about how do you, because so many people who have these gifts kind of naturally
Hmm.
struggle with boundaries where they'll have like spirit communication happening,
All the time.
24/7
Yeah.
and constantly interrupting them, or hey, my mom is over there, go talk to my mom, type thing.
Yeah.
Um, and unfortunately, that's kind of been modeled on some TV shows,
Yes.
which
Hmm.
I'm not sure that that's, I think that's
Ethical.
not the best way to practice. But
Yeah.
I would just, what are your ways of creating those boundaries? Because I think
Hmm.
I know for myself for a long time, I just felt like, oh, I had to be open to spirit all the
All
time.
the time.
And then I realized, oh no, I again can use the power of my intention
Hmm.
and have some boundaries. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, that's a really important question too. And I think a lot of people who are coming into this world, this context, find it almost like a curiosity or strength. They're like, I'm going to be so open all the time that I'm going to see spirits everywhere, and that's amazing. And I think that's kind of like it's the entry point of naivete. It's like, yes, you could, but should you, right? And what are you going to do with that information? Because media would portray it like you should tell everybody all the time. And
Mm,
that is A, unrealistic because it's TV, and that's not how things are actually operating. And B, it is unethical because not everybody is at a point where they need to confront that or should hear that. Sometimes it's quite jarring for you to suddenly jump someone on the street and tell them something about their mom who is standing behind them the whole time you've been walking behind them, right? It might not be something that's helpful to them. It might be something that's scary to them. It might be something that's injurious to them. So there's a whole play of ethics here as well. And anyone who does anything with this gift or any intuitive gift needs to be extremely aware of ethical behavior because everybody has personal rights, right? Everybody has the right to their own information and their own spirit. And just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something, right?
mm.
Boundaries
Yeah,
are important.
thank you so much for that because I've several times I've had people come up to me and say, hey, I feel these two kids by you, and I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm open to it because I'm aware of them.
Right.
but it's not always comfortable for somebody else to be saying, hey, this is what they're saying and this is what they're doing
Hmm.
if I'm not asking for that information.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so I think that's really
Yeah.
good
And
advice.
there's time and place for it too.
Hmm.
We're sidetracking from the question, but we'll get back to it. Um, if you're in the grocery store checking out and you see the checkout, the cashier has someone behind them, it may not be the time and place to tell them, but it might. And it's one of those contextual things where you have to look at the situation in that moment and take discernment. You need to be like best judgment about what is going on in the situation. Um, but there are also really tactful ways to approach that too, where you don't have to say, I see two children spirits next to you. Have you lost a child? You can take the message that they have to go, somebody loves you today. Just know that, right? Somebody loves you today. And that can be just as powerful to somebody who's having a down moment. So,
Yes.
tact and awareness of the situation that you're in and using your best discernment to figure out how to approach that really is supremely important. But as for boundaries and realizing how and when and how to turn it off, that is one of the first things that you probably should be taught because we are here in mortality to be here in mortality, right? And these gifts are given to us to help and serve. I really firmly believe like they're given for the benefit of others around us, right? What good is healing if you can't heal someone else? Like, it would be a useless gift. So we can't get lost in the fact that we still have to live our lives as well and learn the things that we're meant to learn here. And that's really hard to do if you're constantly distracted. So having that on and off switch is really important. And there's a lot of different ways that you can go about understanding how that works. Um, again, that agency that of choice where you can say no is really important that people mostly don't understand. If you're being bothered by spirits and they're getting bothersome, tell them to go away. Tell them. they they kind of have to at some point, right? Um, you can tell them no. A lot of people will have experiences at bedtime at night. And that has a lot to do with the focus of our minds and the openness of that, right? We're not so distracted by things practically and physically speaking. And our minds, our subconscious is more present and we're relaxed. Um, but sometimes they're scary. If you wake up and see someone standing at the foot of your bed, it's a little alarming. Tell them to leave. And you can even use a lot of visualizations are really powerful, like creating a box of light around yourself in your room. Um, what I like to teach people is that you have like an open sign. So whatever that visual looks like for you. For me, I have a table when I'm getting ready to go into a session. I have the circle of light, which is kind of like my shop front, maybe. It's my protecting space, though I don't really need to use it that way anymore. And I have a table with a candle on in like a traditional candle holder. When I light that candle, it's my sign to spirit. I'm ready to work. I'm here. The door's open. Some people have a sign that they flip, closed, open. Some people have a light switch that they turn on and off. And you can kind of, through intentionality, visualization in meditation, um, set that as like a precursor to your subconscious for awareness. So when that light switch is on, I'm going to become aware of the things around me. And when that light switch is off, I'm going to close that awareness and focus on my life and be here in the present. Because when you're not in the present, you will miss things. You'll miss things with your family, you miss things with your job, you're going to get distracted and sidetracked, and you're going to not be as productive or learn or move through your life in the way that you really should. So those boundaries are really important for living because you are alive right now, right?
Right.
Um, so visualization is a really strong way to set that boundary. And it's a bit like programming your subconscious because they're not going to go away, but you're shifting your perspective, right? You're bringing your focus in instead of out. You can have a broad focus or you can have a focus on right now and be mindful of that. So like you're saying with the intention, my intention is to look here instead of looking there. I'm looking here. And so I will tell people for me, it's a lot like when I'm working with spirit, it's like I turn my head and there they are. They're there now. And then when we're done, when we need to bring it back in, we look forward, right? So being intentional about that and practicing in that, whether it's through meditation where you shift your focus back and forth, can be a really strong way just to set up a basic boundary. And then anytime things pop in unnecessarily, you can tell them later. I'll work with you later. I'm going to set aside a time for you. I'll come back to it. Right now, I need to do my business, my stuff. So the power of no is really important. The power of come back in a little while is really important. So half of it is that choice of saying no, and the other half of it is setting the intention to look away from it for right now and focus on what you are meant to be doing in your life, living the living portion.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, so it's kind of like, there's a reason we have a front door on our house.
Right.
We just don't allow everybody into our house at any time of the day. We have a front door, people knock on
Right.
it, and we can say, "Hey, I don't have time right now," or "I do have time," right?
Right.
And we're putting up in a business sense, we're putting up an open sign or a closed sign. So if the closed
Hmm.
sign is there, nobody comes knocking on the door, right? So
Or they get
yeah,
turned away.
exactly.
They'll come
Like,
back.
come back. These are my business hours.
Right. Which isn't to say people won't like intrusively come through the back door sometimes, because it happens.
True. True.
But when that thing happens, you can politely ask them to come back at a different time from the correct perspective,
Yeah.
from the correct door.
Yeah.
Um,
I've heard people say too, and I kind of like this. Early on, I didn't really know what to do with things, but one of the things that I heard that I really liked this perspective was that when you get an intuitive hit that somebody's, mom is there and wants to deliver a message, that you just, thank them for coming and say, have your daughter, son, whatever, find another way to
yeah,
bring that message through. Have them set an appointment with Elle or someone,
hmm,
so that can be done in a proper way where they're prepared.
right. And that's important.
Yeah, super
And I think
important.
a lot of people overlook that. And it's again that can, should principle, because a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, this is so important. The will of that spirit supersedes the will of that person who is trying to live their life. And
Hmm.
sometimes it's the right time to do that. Sometimes I have seen that be critical in a moment where that information can be life changing, right? um, like they're about to make a choice that would very negatively impact. Um, I've worked a lot with people who with suicide, whether
Yeah,
that was spirits through the veil or people here that were considering that option, right? And there
yeah,
have been moments where it has been, I need to say this now because you're about to make a decision that will shift the course of your life in a very negative way.
yeah.
But most those are very infrequent.
Right.
Most of the time, it can wait. And if the person is not prepared to receive that message, it will be much less effective and even sometimes unhelpful because they're startled or surprised or afraid or shocked or taken aback, or it will just go right over their head, right?
Yeah.
I actually had a moment, great story for this. Um, an unfortunate circumstance. My husband had a coworker who took her own life, and it was very tragic. And she left three little children who were actually the same ages as my children, so it hit really
Oh, wow.
close to home.
Yeah.
And this was a coworker that my husband was pretty close to. We had only been here for about 6 months at the time, but she would talk to him every day. During all of her breaks, for some reason, she would just like single him out and chat his ear off. So they had developed quite a friendship. So it was very shocking and very tragic when she took her life. And she came to me very shortly after that. She expressed a lot of regret to me about the choices that she'd made and a lot of pain in those choices and how she hadn't been in her right state of mind when that had occurred. And kind of the circumstances that had precipitated that choice. And she very, very strongly wanted to tell her father why and what had happened very strongly. And of course, it's in my little heart to want to heal and to help people in that circumstance. We attended her funeral a couple of days after that. And her father gave a very beautiful service. And the whole time, I felt her standing behind my shoulder. I did not want to turn around and look because I knew I would see her standing there, just standing there. And it was like, from her perspective, it's a very precarious place because on one hand, I'm an interpreter, I'm a translator, right? I have a responsibility to those spirits on the other side that I am speaking for. But on the other hand, I have a responsibility for those people on this side who are living their lives as well. And there's a balance that has to be struck there, and a lot of ethics that have to be practiced for that, right? And again, I have to use my best judgment in that situation. And her pressure behind me the whole time I was sitting there thinking, how am I going to bring this up? I'm in a funeral full of all these people who are grieving. How am I going to bring this up? So I dithered about it the whole time. And my husband was like, are you going to say something? And I was like, I don't know. I feel like she wants me to. I ended up writing a note. And as we were leaving, I was going to hand it, I was going to leave it in the belongings of the family. They were like sitting in the front row, but we were like the last people in this line of condolences, and it would be really obvious. So I didn't. And I was like, I chickened out. Oh no, as we walked out. And so my husband took the note and he handed it to one of the funeral staff. And they got that note to the father. But of course they remembered who I was because I am very tall and I'm an obvious person. Like when I walk through a room, I'm very visible. So I was a memorable interaction with them. Um, And so they picked me out of who I was, who had left this note for this person. And it was one of those moments where the father wasn't ready for it. He wasn't ready to receive that information. He wanted to know where I got it, how it had happened, if I had further circumstances, like if I knew something had happened,
Right.
right? They actually involved the police, and my husband got a call from a policeman at work if
Wow.
asking if I had further information. And my husband had to kind of explain, no, my wife is actually a medium. Her, like, the daughter came and this is how she received that information. But there was a disconnect between what she had wanted me to say and what the father was ready to receive. He wasn't
Right.
ready to get that information. It had been too short of a time for him to process his grief. And it was very confusing for him. It was very like it protracted this strange hope that he had had, and it ended up doing more harm maybe than good for the family at the time. So you have to be really careful about circumstance and look at the higher good that you're serving and when that happens. Maybe it would be better for that to have happened a couple months in the future. I could have found another way, sent him an email, or I don't know, my husband had connections. I could have contacted the family or something. So you have to look really closely at who you are serving and how you're doing that and what the highest good of the situation is, and kind of use judgment to pick that right decision.
So when you're in the process of working with clients, people who have come directly to you and
Right.
said, "Hey, I would love a reading. I would love a session." Can you give us a couple of examples? Because I know as you do the work, you have this you had this experience where you felt like God was calling you to this work.
Right.
But I also know that as you do the work, there's confirmation in the
Right.
work. So I'm just curious if there's a couple of incidents that, examples that you could share with us without sharing the
Yeah.
specific people of things
I
that
had a
happened.
session just this last weekend that stands out particularly. I'm on maternity leave right now, so I'm only taking things that are kind of like high priority. But this woman had lost a sister, and it had only been a year, and she hadn't been handling that grief process particularly well. It was very much weighing on her. And her daughter asked me to come see her. She was visiting from out of state, so I had just this brief window. And so I came in, and she wasn't sure what to expect. She had seen people working spiritually before, but she wasn't sure what to expect from me. So I kind of gave her a little bit of information about what I was going to do. And immediately her sister was sitting right next to her the whole time. Um, so I was aware of that presence. I saw her there before I even, opened the door, turned on my open sign. Um, but as soon as it was go, her sister immediately started chatting my ear off. And she was telling me all this information about her sister who was here, who was her twin. And she told me all about her personality. She told me all about her life, all about her family, all about her own daughter, and how present she was with the sister that was still living. And factors about the life that she was living right now and things about her husband. And um, when I left, her daughter, who had set up the session, texted me and she's like, "You have no idea how much good you just did." She would never say it. And when I left, she kept saying over and over, "She's sitting right next to me. You just described her. It was like she was here." I'm like, "She is here. She's right next to you." Um, and and she couldn't stop talking about it when I left with her daughter who had set up the reading. And her daughter has texted me a couple of times since then where she was just like, this helped her so much. This helped her so much. Um, it kind of opened her heart to the healing that hadn't happened yet. And I was able to describe to her grief and how her sister wanted her to move beyond that grief, and confirm to her many of the ways that her sister was still showing up in her life. She mentioned to me that she was always sitting next to her in the car, on the couch, while she watched TV, on an airplane, a specific incident on an airplane as she was flying to her sister's funeral. And she was just blown away. She's like, "I thought she was there at that time. I thought she was there. I sat there thinking about her sitting next to me." I'm like, "She was sitting next to you." And all these signs that her sister had been giving her that she questioned, particularly
Mhm.
bird signs, birds all the time. And she's like, "I always think when I see these birds, I think that they might be her." And I'm like, "They are her." Like, she's telling you right now. How could have known that? I couldn't have known that. You didn't tell me. Um, so she left that with much more understanding of how present her sister was, hope in the fact that her sister was still there and that her sister wanted her to heal and overcome this grief, and also that light that comes with closure and with moving on and moving forward, because she hadn't been able to be there as her sister passed. They were separated by continents.
Mm,
So just like one example, there are so many others. I've had people who have come back into faith because they questioned. Death makes you question a lot of things.
mhm,
um, you know it turns your reality upside down, and you start questioning where they are, where they went, how there could be a loving God, and how he could allow this to happen. Um, there's just a lot of pain that comes through those processes, and seeing someone's life completely shift. I've had people tell me, like, "You gave me my son back. I just spent these last 2 hours with my son. Thank you for that." And it gives them a sense of closure that they never could have had in particular circumstances of loss, whether it was sudden or tragic. Um, just amazing, amazing things all the time.
that's awesome. Well, share with us a little bit about one of the questions I always like to ask every guest is what are some of the spiritual practices that you do maybe on a daily or a weekly basis that help you stay connected with your guides, your angels, your, loving ancestors that are around you helping you?
That's a really good question. And it's a question people often ask. um, for me personally, it has a lot to do with my own faith. So, religion and God is a huge part of my story. And I do feel very divinely connected and called into this. So, prayer is a huge part of my life. I'm constantly in prayer. I'm constantly thinking about my that connection I have with God, and the alignment that I have to do that is really important to me in maintaining this connection. So spiritual hygiene is a good word for it that I came across recently that I love. Um, I have a really good prayer practice. I'm in the scriptures a lot, or I'm listening to uplifting material. So whether it's things that other spiritual leaders have said, religious leaders have said. I love world religions. I'm constantly learning about other faiths. I have a background in Eastern philosophy, so I'm constantly like studying Buddhism and Taoism, Confucianism, Hinduism, like all these different things. I love learning about other things and bringing in that light. And I'm a seeker of knowledge, so I'm constantly studying those things, uplifting things. Um, I would say when I have the time, journaling is really important too, because that gratitude practice that comes with finding those things that happened in the day. And if I don't have time to journal, which is a lot right now, I think about them probably right before I go to bed. Um, I think about all of the ways that I have seen or interacted with God and with the spirit world in that day. And there are always numerous things. And I think acknowledging those and highlighting those kind of reinforces that practice of good in my day-to-day life. Meditation should be higher on the list. It's not right now. Sleep is a premium. Prayer is often a meditative practice,
It
right?
really is. It really is. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
I like to say that prayer is our way of talking at God and meditation is his way of talking back to us, right? Connecting in and listening intentionally. So that is sometimes a big one when I have more time. Right now, I might fall asleep. So not so present, but it will be again in the future for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Share with us how people can get a hold of you. I know there's
Right.
going to be people that are going to want to connect with you.
So I failed to mention at the beginning, tragic oversight on my part. I have a podcast. It's a huge process. We're creating a community around these spiritual gifts for anyone who is interested in talking about them, who's had their own experiences, or who are just curious to learn. Particularly spirit communication, as I said, is my niche, but all spiritual gifts, miracles, spiritual experiences through the Veil podcast. Through the Veil with Elle and Camille. So we have the Through the Veil Facebook community that people can find us on, or throughtheveilpodcast.com. I also have a website where people can get a hold of me, spiritually-gifted.com. You can find my email on there. I will be picking back up sessions in January. I'm on maternity leave until then. I also offer, like I said, mentorship and classes, and the information will be found on my website or on our podcast. We talk about it a lot there.
Awesome. And we'll have all of that in the show notes too. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us before we say goodbye?
In closing, probably, um, I would just encourage people to be mindful of moments with their loved ones. If you think something may have been a message or a sign from someone through the veil, think about that. Think about the feeling that you had as you had that experience. If you saw something, if you had a thought that just popped into your mind in that moment, made you think about somebody, um, how did it make you feel? Did it make you feel peaceful? Did it make you feel joyful? Did you have a sudden recollection, that kind of nostalgic notion? Oftentimes, those are our loved ones trying to communicate with us. So, in clothing, I would just encourage people be mindful of that, and you will see the spirit world is around you all the time. They're not quiet; they're soft. It's subtle, but they're constantly speaking to us. Um, so, listen.
Thank you. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a lot of fun.